To learn more about following through, why we don't, and how we can ensure that we will, today I'm talking to clinical psychologist Dr. Steve Levinson, also known as the Follow Through Doc, which I like, and you really dive into it. Steve has spent over 3 decades of making sense of why we often fail to follow through, and how it comes that we don't push through on these intelligent intentions that we often have, and then life happens, or actually things in our brain happen, or distractions happen. Steve has authored 2 books on the topic: Following Through, a revolutionary new model for finishing whatever you start, and The Power to Get Things Done, whether you feel like it or not. I think that last part of the title is also an important element of it. Steve is also the inventor of the MotivAider, and that's a device that helps us to focus on our intentions, and by that helps us follow through. So I have a lot of questions about both your books, or in regard of your books, but also in regard to the MotivAider. Steve, thank you so much for being with me today, and obviously with the viewers and the listeners later on.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. Before we dive in, Steve, into the nitty-gritty of follow through, I'd like to start with a personal question, if I may, which
Sure.
is what is your personal story? What led you to become so involved or so committed to this topic of follow through?
Sure. Well, being a human being and living on this planet with other human beings, one of the things that frustrated me always, for as long as I can remember, is that I would make promises to myself and often wouldn't keep them.
Yeah.
And it just didn't make any sense to me. And once I became a psychologist, I discovered that was the area of human nature that interested me the most. I'd look into other things, and then I would always come back to this. Why is it that people have the intelligence, the experience, the wisdom, the ability to tap into other people's intelligence and experience and wisdom, to figure out what they should do to make their lives better in all kinds of ways, little ways, big ways, all kinds of ways in between. And yet they often don't do what they know they should do and what they truly promise themselves that they will do. Yeah. It just didn't make any sense to me. It seemed like such a waste. And I saw people who were extremely successful in many areas of their lives who were terrible at following through in other areas of their lives. I worked with some professional athletes who, were great. They'd go to practice every day. They'd spend hours and hours working on a particular skill. But then in other areas of their lives, they were lousy spouses. They were lousy parents. They had great intentions. They were very serious. They would promise themselves over and over again, but they wouldn't do it. And then when I worked in a medical facility, and I worked lots with not just people with mental health problems, but people with physical health problems, with illnesses, injuries, and so on that were recovering. People would often know exactly what they had to do in order to get well or get well faster. They would truly intend to do it, and often they would just not do it. They would just fizzle out. They'd do it for a while, but they would not finish. So to me, the more I looked into it, the more I found that it's universal. It doesn't matter what culture somebody is in, how old they are. It's just that human beings do a lousy job of making good on their own good intentions.
Yes. Yeah, there's 2 things actually that stand out from what you just shared. And I think it's interesting, these athletes, for instance, who are very disciplined and very structured and very focused in one side of life, and how they don't do well on following through on their intention in other elements of their life. I think I'd like to talk more about that. It's interesting to me. And at the same time, how we know what's good for us intellectually, but how then to do it. I think also in your book, there's plenty of examples about this, about healthy living, for instance, or diet choices, that when we are presented with a choice, then it's still, we take the candy over the salad, basically, so to speak. Right. Why is that? So 2 questions in one.
Sure. Well, for one thing, we humans, we have a very interesting place on this planet. We are the only beings that can actually use intelligence to figure out what we should do for our survival, our well-being, our improvement, and then not do it.
Exactly.
I mean, that is truly amazing. You
Yeah.
take the simplest organism, the simplest animal, and they do the right thing.
Yes.
They just do it. They're pushed to do it. You don't have like a squirrel in the fall doesn't think, I really should go and gather some acorns because it's going to get cold. It's going to get difficult to get food in the winter. So I ought to go get them now and put them away. But God, I don't really feel like doing it.
Yeah.
I think I'll watch a football game instead. I mean, they don't do that. They just, if they need to do it, they just do it. It just, it's their needs are directly connected to their behavior. There's no gap there. For us, we use intelligence to figure out what we should do, but our intelligence doesn't require us to do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't require us to do it. So you can use your brain, your experience. You can ask other people who have been there before. You can find out exactly what you should do. You should go gather acorns for the winter, for example, but not feel like doing it and then not do it.
Yeah.
And this is the biggest problem. And we have not understood that. Psychologists and others have not understood that the mind doesn't work the way we think it should work. It works the way it does work.
Yeah.
And the way it does work is it makes a huge separation between figuring out what we should do and actually doing it. What we actually do is often governed primarily by how we feel, what we feel like doing, not by what we've decided we should do. Yeah.
That's an interesting one. What we do is governed by how we feel instead of by our rational thinking.
Yeah. So we basically have two, I call them guidance systems.
Yes.
That tell us what to do. On the one hand, we have intelligence. We're a Mother Nature's finest experiment, to create a species that behaves based on what it can figure out about the best course to take for the future. That's our intelligence-based guidance system. But then Mother Nature forgot to disconnect the more primitive system, which is based on what you feel.
Yeah.
So we figure out what we should do, and then what we do is based often more on how we feel like acting.
Yeah.
I had a great story once. I worked with a family physician who had a little mole on his hand, and he would tell his own patients if they had something similar that it really should be removed. It might be nothing, but we don't want to take any chances. Yeah. It's not a big deal. We use a little anesthesia and we, dull the sensations, and then we just cut it off. It takes a few minutes, no big deal. But he didn't do it himself.
Yeah.
And so one day there was a snowstorm, and his patients didn't show up because they couldn't get there. So he decided, this is the day. I've been putting this off for 2 or 3 years. I'm going to do it. So he put his hand down on the table and went to cut off the mole, and his hand went away. And he said he spent about an hour chasing his hand around the operating room because his intelligence told him exactly what to do. This is the right thing to do for your health, your safety. Do it. Just take this thing off. But his behavior was still governed by primitive feelings. And that's the way, that's an extreme example, but it illustrates how we are wired.
Yeah. His primitive guiding system was protecting him from cutting himself. So,
but his primitive guidance system is not smart.
Yeah.
So the part of the guidance system that was smart should be in charge, but it often isn't.
Yeah. I want to come back. This is very interesting, and I'll jump back to this in a second. But I want to come back to what you said before, which is these athletes who are very, very, they're excellent actually in one part of life, and yet they are really sloppy and stagnant in other parts. Is there something that you found more in your research that, especially with these extreme performers, because it all comes at a price, right? There's a certain focus and a certain energy that has to go into that performance, and that then other parts are slacking. What are your findings there?
Yes. Well, what I can tell you is that the circumstances are very different, and circumstances play a huge part in whether people follow through or not.
Yeah.
So an athlete is in an environment where there are lots of things pushing them all the time to do the right thing, to practice. They get in trouble if they don't show up for practice. They get in trouble if they don't practice long enough. They get in trouble if their performance stinks. There are incentives to pull them to do it. There are also punishments if they don't. So they're surrounded by an infrastructure, so to speak, that supports follow through. And that very same kind of infrastructure is absent in other areas of their life where they do poorly. And one of the discoveries that I made is that all of us, if we want to be follow through champions and we really want to be effective human beings, which requires follow through, the best thing for us to do is to actually realize that following through requires an infrastructure and that we have to build it. We can't just intend to do something and think that the job is done. We then have to construct a simple infrastructure that supports acting on that intention.
And there should be consequences. And I think a good example, actually, we talked about it just before we started recording, is actually this project, because I committed to it publicly. Every 9 days, I have this deadline, and if I don't, the whole world, I mean, not everyone watches this, obviously, but everyone can see that I stink and I don't say what I do. So I'm publicly committed, and there's a consequence if I don't. So that's
Julius, you have it.
Yeah,
you have it. You built a beautiful infrastructure that supports your good intention, a good intention that otherwise might have just bit the dust. No, I did the same thing accidentally. Mine was perhaps more accidental. I wrote a book on following through. Do you know how embarrassing it would be to not follow through after writing a book on following through? I mean, that has been probably the biggest boost to my follow through in my life. I'm very conscious of the fact. I certainly don't want to be a hypocrite. It'd be kind of silly if here's a guy that writes a book on following through and becomes an expert on following through, and he makes this promise to himself and he doesn't keep it. I have to do it.
So has something changed for you personally since you completed this research, that you couldn't be as sloppy as you were before because you had to this topic?
Absolutely. And I can tell you, there are a few things that have changed. One of the most important things that have changed is that I consider an intention to be a solemn promise. Now, the place where people get off the track in the first place with following through is they don't take their own intentions very seriously. They're easy. It's easy to come up with an intention. Every day you wake up, you get out of bed. By the time you're out of bed for 15 minutes, you can think of all kinds of things to do to make your life better in some way, to be a better person in some way. But then doing it is another story. So often we just take on these promises without putting much thought into them, without thinking through, okay, how am I going to actually keep this promise? And every time you adopt a promise that you can't keep because you didn't do your due diligence, so to speak, in adopting it, you make all of your promises that come after it weaker. They're just not as effective. The best way to think about it, if you think about an intention as a promise you make to yourself, you can draw some insight from thinking about what would happen if you made it a promise to someone else, to a good friend or a family member, and then didn't keep it. Pretty soon, you'll make promises and they have no clout, they have no credibility, and that happens to yourself. If you treat I always say that if you treat your intentions as if they're a dime a dozen, that's how much they'll be worth.
I fully agree with that. I think it's very important to do what you say you will do. Actually, it builds confidence if you do that, and it breaks down your confidence if you don't.
Exactly. Exactly. Also, it is. I always think about it as hauling something very heavy behind you to have an intention that you're not acting on. So in other words, if you make a promise to yourself and you think it's a good promise, but you're not doing anything about it, it actually saps energy out of you to haul it around. You're better off just making an announcement to yourself, looking in the mirror and say, I no longer intend to do this.
Yeah.
Forget it. It's just not worth it. I don't have time. I have other things that are more important. I'm officially divorcing this promise.
Yeah.
It's gone.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because actually that process probably helps really clear the sheet and helps you make a start, instead of having to always carry all this old stuff that you didn't do or never really started or keep half finishing or yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Good point. Yeah.
Exactly. You're better off making few promises and keeping them than making a whole bunch of promises and keeping only, 15% of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So we spoke already shortly about the intelligence-based guidance system and the primitive guidance system. And basically you said in your book that we as humans we're not wired actually for follow through because of those two different driving forces. And there's an inherent flaw. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. Yeah. We basically use one guidance system to figure out what we should do. And then our behavior is pushed and pulled by the other guidance system. So we're constantly at war, essentially. Yeah. We figure out what we should do, and then we do something else instead. The discovery that I made that I think can help people, if they take it seriously, can help people follow through a whole lot better, is that there is a way, if you take seriously that the mind doesn't treat good intentions the way it should, and you look at how it does treat good intentions, you can actually make it work. You can make things work. And here's how you can make things work. If you are very tired and you really want to go to sleep, and you also intend to go to sleep, you'll go to sleep, no problem. What you feel like doing matches what you intend to do, okay? Yeah. But if you feel like going to sleep and you intend to stay awake, you're going to have a conflict.
Yes.
You're going to have a conflict, and you may well end up going to sleep. Okay, so the insight here, the discovery, if you will, is that if in fact you create situations on purpose that make you feel like doing exactly the same thing that you intend to do, you can follow through.
Yeah.
Let me give my favorite example.
Yeah, please.
It was a gentleman, like so many people, who felt that it was very important for his health and his weight to exercise every day. But he had tried many, many times to get into an exercise routine, and it just never worked. He would go for a few days and then he would fizzle out. So he had this idea, and here's his idea. He decided that from now on, he would only own one stick of underarm deodorant, okay? And he would keep that stick of underarm deodorant in his locker at the gym. And here was his thinking. His thinking was, okay, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning the way I always do, thinking, boy, I really should exercise. And then my primitive guidance system is going to say, yeah, right. Who wants to exercise?
Why not to do it this day? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then he said, then I will think, okay, if I don't get up and go to the gym, I am going to stink all day.
Literally, yeah.
So he went to the gym. Yeah. So the interesting thing about this is that for the right reasons, for health reasons, weight reasons, just the way he looked, everything that was important, that he felt was important, he wasn't getting to the gym.
Yeah.
But for a wrong reason, a silly reason that he created, that motivated him to actually take action, because the thought of stinking it just was unacceptable to him completely. Yeah. That got him to move. And once he got to the gym, he would have felt like an idiot to just open his locker, use his deodorant and go home. So he stayed and he exercised.
Yeah.
So and before long, he had created a habit that was self-sustaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's creating the trigger that is enough to stimulate us to do something.
Exactly. It's finding what moves you, what makes it feel necessary to do the very same thing that your intelligent guidance told you should do.
Yeah.
If you get those two things in sync, they don't work in sync on their own. But if you get them in sync deliberately by being creative in setting up situations that pull them together, that make them work together instead of apart, which normally they do, then you've got it. Then you can follow through.
But how would one go about finding that thing that triggers him or her? I mean, let's take the example of getting out of bed in the morning. Many people have the intention to get up at a certain time, and when they're in the comfort of their bed, they're like, oh, let me snooze a little bit longer. I'm guilty of that. I do that sometimes. So
Sure.
how can we trick ourselves or trigger ourselves or incentivize ourselves so that we don't do that? How can we find that thing that moves us?
Yeah. By the way, first of all, don't worry about using the word trick, because following through like a champion requires tricking yourself.
Okay. Yeah.
There's nothing to be embarrassed about that. That's if you actually look at the way the mind is designed and the way the mind, not the way the mind should work, but the way the mind does work, tricking yourself is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be embarrassed about that.
But then how can you find the right trick in these different situations?
To some degree, by trial and error and just being honest with yourself. Like for many people have a bias for thinking that, okay, if they're going to motivate themselves to do something that they'd really rather not do, but they know they should do it, they need to have some kind of reward. They need to have a carrot, so to speak. There has to be some, but if they actually are honest with themselves and they look at what moves them on a day-to-day basis, it's a stick that works much more effectively for them than a carrot. Yeah. So if you're the kind of person where a stick works better, look for a stick, create a stick. An example, for example, of something that often motivates people is making a promise to a child.
Yeah.
If you have a young child and you promise the young child that if you get up every day, for a week, that you'll take them to a playground or someplace they want to go, or do something that they want to do, or buy them something that they want to have, that has an impact on many people. You can feel that. So as you're laying in bed thinking, gee, I'd really rather stay here than get up, you think, oh boy, I made that promise and I'm going to hear about it if I don't keep it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's just an example of something that moves people. Yes, accountability.
Yeah.
And often people do this. Often they'll make a promise to themselves and then they'll keep it secret. They don't want to tell anyone else. And that's exactly the wrong thing to do in most cases. Yeah. Because going public with a promise is something that makes you feel more accountable, especially if you tell the right people.
Yeah.
If you're working somewhere and you tell your boss that you're going to get something done by Thursday, you're going to get it done by Thursday.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So the accountability is really, it's an interesting stick in a way for us to get into action. Yeah. Exactly.
It's pulling the pin out of a hand grenade. I mean, then you feel it. You don't just feel it once, but you feel it. It pushes you, it pulls you, it makes you do, it makes you feel that it's necessary to do what you've decided you should do.
Yeah.
Because deciding what you should do is not enough to get it done. Often the reasons that motivate you, even if you're terribly excited, if you've got a great idea, like your project, if you have a great idea about something you should do, it's very easy to feel that inspiration and mistake it for something that's going to take you all the way to the finish line.
Yeah.
It won't.
Yeah.
You need other sources of pressure, carrots, sticks, whatever it takes to keep you going throughout the whole course to get to the finish line. It's not enough to just get started.
No, that's true. And indeed to follow through. And I've even the example, because I climbed Kilimanjaro as part of this project. It came up, and because of it, I researched spontaneity, and it was kind of a spontaneous event. But one of the hardest posts that I've written was, yet I still completed it in time, was the one after I came down from Kilimanjaro. And it wasn't my best writing perhaps, but at least I completed it, and So again, the accountability and being public about it, it really has a driving force. Yeah.
Yes. And then going back to your question about athletes, that's what happens for them. Everything is accountable. They're accountable for their performance is public, and
yeah, it's the same. I'm training for an Ironman, and I have my weekly training schedule, and I have to indicate which trainings I completed and which I didn't. And obviously, so there's direct feedback from my coach if I don't complete a training. So that for me is like, I don't want to pay this guy to tell me I'm not doing my training. So I'll make sure that I'll find a way to complete the trainings.
That's right. So you have skin in the game.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. It's very important. And often people go out of their way to avoid that.
Yeah.
Someone will say, well, I'm gonna quit smoking or some other bad habit. I don't want to tell anyone about that yet because it'll jinx me or something. Yeah. That's exactly the wrong thing to do. The best thing to do would be to go on national television, tell the whole world that you're going to do it. Please check on me every day.
Yeah. Put something on the line, risk something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I have a question, another question. According to Peter Hollins, he's the author of Finish What You Start. Follow through, reasons why people don't follow through is because of inhibiting tactics, such as poor goal setting, for instance, or procrastination, distractions, or poor time management, and psychological roadblocks, as he calls it. And examples of this are laziness, lack of discipline, fear of judgment, rejection, and failure, perfectionism, and lack of self-awareness. And especially this latter part is interesting to me because as a clinical psychologist, especially curious to hear your thoughts on these psychological roadblocks, and especially the fear of judgment, rejection, and failure. If we connect this with what we talked about before, putting it out in the open, it's also a reason why sometimes people don't do it or they don't go public. So how can we better deal with this and ultimately follow through in spite of it?
Yeah, I would say I'm just making up a number here, that all of those factors, they're all legitimate. I've seen them all in my practice, working with people for many, many decades.
Yeah.
But they make up 10% of the reasons that people don't follow through. 90% has to do with the wiring. And it's a species problem rather than an individual problem. Yeah. And people often go on a wild goose chase trying to solve their own, individual problems, like a lack of self-discipline, when in fact that it's legitimate, but it's a minor problem compared to the wiring problem. And the wiring problem, and this is like I always think in big picture terms of what it would have been like to be back in the caveman days, when we watched birds fly and we thought, boy, that'd be really cool to be able to fly like that. People must have jumped out of trees and off cliffs and tried to get the right flapping technique to see how to, and at some point we finally figured out, what, we're just not designed to do this. No. It's not a matter of flapping your arms correctly or strongly enough or fast enough or slow enough. It's not, we're just not designed to do it. And I believe we are in an analogous situation when it comes to following through. We are not wired to follow through, which means that we have to come up with some tricks, just like we came up with as a species. We came up with tricks like airplanes. We figured out how, if we can't do it with the equipment that we have, we'll use our intelligence to create equipment that allows us to fly like birds inside machines. And I think we have to do the same thing with following through. We have to use our intelligence to figure out that we don't have the wiring, and to make up for the wiring, we have to create infrastructure or situations or circumstances that make us feel like we must do what we've intelligently decided we should do. Yeah. To me, it's the only solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the rest of the stuff, I don't want to, minimize it or dismiss it, but again, my estimate is that it accounts for 10% of the failure to follow through that people experience.
Yeah,
90% is the wiring, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault.
So there's no need to bother with that 10%. Actually, the low-hanging fruit is by changing the wiring in the sense that you create the urgency or the drive or find the right tricks to start feeling like you want to do what you intend intellectually to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, a good illustration is willpower. People talk often about willpower, and they say when they do a poor job of following through, they will often say, well, I guess I just don't have enough willpower.
Yeah.
And willpower, people don't often think carefully about what willpower is. You know, it's the ability to do something when you feel like doing the opposite, or it's the ability to not do something that you shouldn't do when you feel like doing it. And people give themselves a very poor rap when they fail because of poor willpower. When willpower is not really the problem. It's how we use it. It's and I talk about leverage. It's if you had a flat tire on your car, and you stopped and you pulled over to the side and you had to fix it, you probably wouldn't try to lift your car with your bare hands and unscrew the nuts on the wheels with your bare hands.
You probably wouldn't succeed. Yeah. You
wouldn't succeed. And you wouldn't even try, because you would think, okay, there's a tool for this. There's a tool. You can use a tool that allows you to have enough strength to get the job done. You don't have enough strength to lift the car, but you have enough strength to operate this tool that will let you do it. Or even yet, to take out your phone and call someone to come and fix it. So that's a matter of leverage, where you have an objective, you have an intention, and you can make it happen if you use the right tool. But if you don't use a tool, you can't get it done. It's crazy. And that's what people do oftentimes. They actually don't use a little bit of willpower in a way that leverages it enough to get the whole job done. So an example, let's say, and I use food as an example because everybody eats and everybody likes foods or certain foods. If there was a particular food that you liked, but you've decided you shouldn't eat it anymore because it's just not healthy, you just got to stay away from it. Would it be easier for you to have that food item right in front of you and make it your burden to just not eat it, even though it's right there and it's very easy to eat?
Yeah, that makes it very tempting and hard to not eat it.
Right. Would it be better for you to say, Steve, would you help me out here? Would you take this food because I don't want to eat it, put it in a bank vault somewhere in another country or another continent or another planet? Then you would have enough willpower to stay away from food that's in a bank vault, thousands of miles away, than if it's right in front of you and very accessible. That's an example of leveraging your willpower. So if you said, I don't have enough willpower, I would say to you, Julius, you have enough willpower if you leverage it right. Give me the food and I'll hide it. I'll hide it or I'll lock it up.
So that comes back to the context, as you mentioned before, creating the right context that supports your intelligent thinking and what you intelligently think is best for yourself, and then creating the context.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
that's what it takes in my mind. Every time you create an intention, every time you adopt an intention, you say, this is a promise. I want to make this promise. I want to keep it. You're not done. Your job is not done at that point. Your job isn't done until you decide on the context that you're going to create, the circumstances, the situation, the infrastructure that you're going to create to make sure that you actually act in accord with that promise.
Yeah. I do want to follow up on that though, because this is a new part for many people to look at it in this way, to find or to actually see it as a second step that you need to take, which is creating the context, which is creating the framework for it. As I mentioned with the example we talked about for getting out of bed, how can people approach this systematically to find these tricks or to find these incentives themselves, what works for them. If they cannot muster it with discipline or with other incentives, what kind of approach, is there some kind of standard way that you can recommend for people to approach designing this context for them?
Yes, there are a number of strategies that are worth, worth the effort to learn about. And the strategies, like an example of a strategy is willpower leveraging, which I just gave a couple of examples of, which is okay, if you want to get yourself to do something, don't think of doing it by just trying harder. Think about what you can do to, it's sort of the equivalent of setting an alarm clock, right? When you set an alarm clock, what you're doing is you're registering an intention to wake up at a certain time, but you know that on your own, you're not going to be doing that. You're not going to wake up. So you're causing something to happen that's going to trigger waking up in accord with your intention. And that's sort of the prototype, I think, for willpower leveraging, to actually set or create triggers that force you in a way, or push you or shove you to do the things that you intend to do. So you never want to, whenever you think about, okay, I've decided I need to do this, you never want to think about doing it on the basis of trying or just using willpower. What kind of trigger can you create? What kind of trigger? I remember working with a fellow who had to get up early in the morning to work on studying for an exam. He was facing some kind of licensure that he really wanted, that was going to help his career, and so he wanted to get up early, a half hour earlier, and spend some time studying because he wasn't getting it done. And he tried, and every morning he'd wake up with the usual, okay, I really should get up now, and he just stayed in bed, didn't do it. Then he came up with this idea of getting a second alarm clock. So he had an alarm clock next to his bed. He got an alarm clock to put in his children's room. And he set that alarm clock for 5 minutes later than the alarm clock he had in his room. And so his alarm would go off, and he would say the usual thing to himself, yeah, I really should get up and study, but I don't feel like it. I'd rather just stay in bed. And then it would occur to him that if I don't get up, the alarm clock is going to go off in my children's room. The kids are going to wake up. My wife is going to kill me, as she should. He'd get out of bed. So he'd get out of bed to go turn off the alarm clock in his children's room, and then he was up. And once he was up, he studied. So that's how he created a trigger. If he relied on his willpower alone, which he had been doing, he didn't get anything done. But he relied on his ingenuity to create a context, a situation, an infrastructure that caused him to behave in accord with his own intelligent guidance.
We spoke about leveraging willpower. Are there other strategies that you can share?
And one of the most important, I think, is creating compelling reasons. And we sort of touched on those in some of the examples that I gave. But creating compelling reasons has to do with the very simple observation that often the motives that get you to adopt an intention are not the motives that will actually get you to act in accord with it day after day after day after day. You have to create something that you can actually feel in your gut that makes you move. An example was the fellow who was trying to exercise on a regular basis, and could only do it by keeping his deodorant in his locker at the gym. Because that made him move. That caused him to do what he intended to do. Whereas the right reasons, being healthy, being trim, all the right reasons, it just didn't hold a candle to the wrong reason that actually worked. So creating compelling reasons is to, I would say, and I'll go out on a limb with this, you can get yourself to do anything. You can get yourself to follow through on anything if you're willing to create the right compelling reason.
Yeah.
You think of anything that you think you should do that you're not doing. And I can tell you, if you're willing to do it, I can tell you that there's a way that you can get yourself to do it.
Yeah.
If you set things up, if you say, oh, well, this afternoon, I'm going to finally do this project that I said I was going to do. I promised I was going to do to myself many, many times. I'm going to do it this afternoon. And if I said to you, Julius, okay, let's make a deal. You either do it this afternoon or you give me your car or your house or your whatever,
Yeah.
something of value to you. If you, this puts in perspective the problem that we have with good intentions and following through. If you said today, I intend to do this project, and I said to you, Julius, okay, so do you really intend to do it? You say, yes, absolutely. Really? Serious? Yes. Okay. So can you sign this document saying that I can have your house or your car or both if you don't do it? If you hesitated at all, that is proof. It is proof positive that we don't take our intentions seriously.
Yeah.
Because really, if you took your intentions seriously, you should never ever hesitate to sign such a document, to enter such a preposterous deal.
But obviously, many people, including you and me, we don't intend, or we don't take our intention so seriously. Otherwise, this book would have never written, and why we struggle with this. But what I'm hearing is that this is kind of the stick. The sticks works the best, I feel. And what about the carrot? What about creating a carrot for ourselves? I mean, it works, but probably not as effectively as the stick. Am I right?
Yeah, I don't have a bias against
Either
carrots.
Or.
Yeah. I just think you have to use what works.
Yeah.
And from my own experience, which may not be representative, from my own experience, I think sticks generally make people feel like they must act more than carrots do.
Yeah.
People can do without some kind of reward that they don't already have.
Yeah.
But they do not do well with punishment. Something that's negative gets them moving. Yeah. So I would never discourage someone from looking for carrots, but if carrots don't work, they don't work. Then you better find a stick.
Yeah.
Or else you just have to tolerate being lousy at following through.
Yeah, that's also an option. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there other strategies that you can share apart from willpower leveraging and creating compelling reasons for getting into action?
Yes, there's one that's it's a gentle strategy, and I call it leading the horse to water.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I use this strategy. I'll give you an example. I use this strategy myself to establish an exercise routine many, many years ago. And I had struggled, and I'd do something for a few days, and then I just couldn't keep up. So here's what I did. I decided that I was going to ride an exercise bike every day. But I would wake up in the morning and I would think, okay, it's time to exercise. And if you've ridden an exercise bike before, especially without headphones and something to distract you, 10 minutes can feel like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
It can be quite burdensome, quite boring, quite dreadful. And that's the way it felt to me. So I would avoid it. I would do everything I could to avoid it. So I finally decided, okay, I can't avoid it anymore, because by avoiding it, I have no chance of building the routine, of establishing a routine of actually doing this every day. So I'm going to make it possible for me to establish a routine by making what I have to do so easy that there's no reason to avoid it anymore. So what I did was I set the following requirement. All I had to do was put on my exercise clothes and my shoes and go and sit on the damn bike. That's all I had to do. If I did that, and I did it every day, I would be satisfying the requirements of my good intention.
Yeah.
That's all I had to do. And if I was sitting there and I felt like pedaling, I could pedal, but no requirement whatsoever. And if I pedaled a little bit, there was no requirement to pedal any more than that.
Yeah.
But I would do it every day. And that was the deal. That is, as long as I was not pushed or forced or induced in any way to do anything more than what I was comfortable with, I would agree to just do it every day. I had no problem with that. I woke up in the morning and I didn't think, oh, geez, I got to sit on that thing for half hour. I just, all I have to do is put on my clothes, my shoes, and go sit on it. Well, I did that. Some days I didn't do much more than sit on it, but most days I pedaled. Because after all, I'm sitting on this bike.
We might as well.
I'm all prepared for it, and I don't have to do any more than I feel like doing.
Yeah.
I'll just do it. Well, before long, and it wasn't very long at all, I did it every day.
And it was a routine.
I did it. I did it. And see the key here, the concept is that by requiring yourself to do something that you feel very inclined to avoid, you never get to build the infrastructure of the habit. You never get to build the shell, so to speak, of the habit. By making it so easy, so unavoidance worthy, that it's okay to do it. There's no reason to avoid it. Then you build the shell, you build, the skeleton, so to speak, of the habit, and then the rest of it comes along. And I've been doing it now for years, and I wouldn't consider not doing it.
Yeah, it's part of your routine.
Yes.
So how long does it take before something typically becomes a routine and becomes a habit? How much do we have to push ourselves or trick ourselves into it becoming an automatic thing? What is your finding in this regard?
I have a very clear answer for that.
Yeah.
As long as it takes.
Yeah, because you often hear like do something for 30 days and then
that's baloney. It's just not true. It depends on the habit, depends on the person, depends on the circumstances.
Yeah.
As long as it takes.
Yeah.
That is my final and best answer. As long as it takes.
Well, it's an
because if you stop before it's done, it's not done.
Yeah.
You might as well have not started.
Yeah.
But it works. Once you create a routine, once you create a habit, it has a life of its own. So it's not like you're investing in something that may never work. It will work, but you have to stick with it until it's done.
Yeah.
And you have to make it easy.
Yeah.
So there's some other strategy. Let me tell you about my favorite strategy. And it's not something that people would use all that often, but what makes it my favorite strategy is that it really brings home the point that we're not wired right. And the way we are wired is it's kind of screwy. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. And I call this the going too far strategy. And I'll give you an example of a person that we use this with. This is a person who worked in an office with a boss, a leader who really felt, as many bosses do, that making sure that people had things to snack on during the day is the key to good employee morale. Okay, so they had a break room where people could go and take a 15-minute break, and there would always be a pile of big pile of donuts on this plate. And and they'd keep them refilled, so if they were getting low, somebody would come in and put more out. Well, this woman, her name was Tammy, she every day she would intend not to eat the donuts because she was gaining weight and not thinking that this was the healthiest thing for her to do.
Probably right.
She would intend to not eat donuts, but then she'd always eat one and then certainly intend to not eat another one, but then she would eat another one and then another one. She had as many as 5 in a day. I think she averaged 3, but as many as 5 in a day. And this just really irritated her. She did everything she could to try harder, in quotes, which is what people normally do when they say they tried to, follow through on something and they failed. They're going to try harder next time, which means nothing. It doesn't mean anything. So she tried harder, nothing ever happened. So this is what I told her to do. I said, you have to make a promise to do this. And this is gonna solve the problem for you. The promise that you have to make is that if you go in and you do your usual, you try not to take any, but you have to give in and you take a donut, you must take and eat 3. You must take and eat 3.
Yeah.
Okay?
I was gonna say you have to at least eat 5 or something like that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we didn't want to overdo it, right?
Yeah.
She thought we were crazy anyway. So,
Yeah.
so we just made it 3. So she said, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I eat 3? Can you make that promise? Can you make that deal with us? That if you're going to have any, you must
You always
have
have
3.
3. Yeah.
Yeah. She came back and she could barely even talk. She was laughing so hard. She said, what happened was I tried to stay away, which I always do. And then I went to take 1. And I remember I told these guys that I would take 3 and eat them. So I went to take 3. She said, I couldn't do it. She said, it was like running into a brick wall at high speed. I couldn't do it. I couldn't take any. I couldn't do it. And she never did it again.
So she found her trigger. Yeah.
Yes. And what this strategy teaches is that even though we do a poor job of following through on our good intentions,
Mm-hmm.
if we make a commitment to do an even poorer job, if we do just a poor job, it actually serves as a powerful consequence.
Yeah.
That enables us to follow through.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Those are people who like to smoke, for instance, they might want to quit, to commit to, if they smoke, that they have to smoke like 6 cigarettes in one go straight after each other. I'm just saying something, but
yeah. Or I've worked with smokers where they actually sign a contract that if they don't quit this time, they can't quit for 2 years.
huh. That's interesting.
Now
It's
that
also
doesn't
reverse
make any
psychology.
sense. That's counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive, but one of the things that is most punishing to people is to be prohibited from doing what they intend to do, even though without being prohibited, they're not doing it.
Yeah.
I used to do this with myself. If there was like a work project that I was avoiding, just it had to be done, but it was unpleasant. If I was in my office and I wasn't working on it, I would then require myself to stand up and put my hand in my pockets so that I made it very clear that I was just a slacker, doing nothing, wasting time. And I would stand and I would have to stand until I was ready to work again.
Yeah.
And I rarely had to stand for more than a few minutes.
But you did stand sometimes, because that's also.
Oh yeah, I did. Oh, I did.
Yeah. But then you certainly followed through on your intentions also when you don't. That's
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I made my poor follow through bigger than life.
Yeah.
In a way that I got the message. It was loud and clear.
Yes.
I used the same thing, and I've used things with clients before, where if they're avoiding a project that's very important, and they're getting really anxious about not getting it done, okay, work on it today. But if you don't work on it today, you can't work on it tomorrow either. Or you can't work on it for 2 more days. And it's surprising how punishing it is to be prevented from following through on something that you weren't following through on.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's again, this is my favorite strategy because it shows how foolishly wired our system for following through on intentions actually is.
And it works. So because I'm also, when I hear you say this, I feel skeptical, and I think, I'll experiment with it myself and
try it.
Yeah.
Try it.
Yeah.
Another
I myself not to do something if I don't do something. Yeah.
Yeah. Another strategy I call right before wrong.
Mhm.
And in that strategy, you allow yourself to do the thing that you've decided not to do anymore, but only based on one condition. The condition is you'll do the right thing first. So I'll use food again. It's always,
Mhm.
because it's universal. Everybody eats. Everybody's to some degree struggles with what they should eat, what they shouldn't eat. If you decided that you should eat, if you're going to have a snack, it should be a healthy snack, not something like potato chips or something, something that's not very healthy, but that you like, that you're drawn to. Fine, you can have the potato chips or whatever. What's your favorite snack that you shouldn't have?
Well, actually, I'm thinking I have a bag of potato chips that I sometimes eat, but I know it's not really a healthy thing to eat. So
Okay. So if
yeah.
you want to have them, if you're feeling really drawn to them and you want to have them, you can have it, but just have an apple first.
Yeah. And sometimes when we're even too lazy to eat the apple, we won't eat the chips. Yeah.
Exactly.
Or after we eat the apple, then we don't need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Often doing the right thing first, even though it's not what you wanted, it satisfies the same need, and you won't do the wrong thing. You'll do the right thing and you won't do the wrong thing. But even if you do the wrong thing, by doing this, you're establishing the habit of doing the right thing.
It's interesting.
If it's a choice, if it's a choice between doing the right thing and the wrong thing, too often you'll do the wrong thing, and then you'll never develop the habit of doing the right thing.
It's interesting because actually for a few days already, I have a big cone of Ben and Jerry's ice cream in my freezer that I've been really looking forward to eating. But I've had quite a busy week, and never in the evening. I always forced myself at least to have a proper meal or have like some good food before I get to the point where I can snack something. And in the end, I'm just too tired and I'm already full and I don't eat it. And it's been there for days, and already since a while I've been craving it. At least I think I crave it, but clearly not enough. So I'm kind of doing this.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And if you put that Ben and Jerry's ice cream right on the table while you're sitting there, you'll probably eat it.
Yeah.
Because then it requires
no effort.
It's calling your name. Say,
Yeah.
Julius, come.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you kept it in your neighbor's freezer, it would be even better.
Yes. Yeah. If you don't keep it at all, it's even better still. Yeah.
Then it's even better if you left it in the store.
Yeah. Yeah. And it tricked me to bring it home, but there's still some work to do.
Yeah.
When we want to change, that's not enough in itself. We also have to keep our attention focused on what we want. And I'd like to talk about your MotivAider, because I think this is a very helpful tool for this. Can you share a bit more about this process and how that works? Why it works and how it works?
Sure. The mind, I guess you've probably already picked up on this from what I've already said, that I'm not one of these people who thinks that the human mind is a brilliant piece of engineering that has no flaws. It has some flaws. And I think that we get so carried away in thinking about the amazing things that it does, which is true, that we tend to overlook some of the design issues that it has. It's not like the human body has some. We all have an appendix, right? We don't need it, and it often causes trouble. And the mind has some features that are not they're not really well suited to the way we live or the way we would like to live. And one of the things that I discovered is that the mind is very well equipped to respond to reminders or prompts or what I call cues.
Yeah.
But it is extremely poorly equipped to create its own reminders or prompts or cues. So let me give you an example. Suppose, and many people have an issue with posture. Their posture is not very good when they're sitting or when they're standing. They slouch. It can create problems, back problems. but it can also just give other people an impression that they're not alert or engaged or interested, and that's not really an accurate representation of what they are like as a person, but their posture conveys that. So many people intend to improve their posture. If you're like most people, if you woke up in the morning and you decided at, let's say, 8 a.m. that, you know what, my posture needs some improvement. I'm going to improve my posture. I'm going to stand up straighter and I'm going to sit up straighter. And I think that will make me look better, feel better, avoid problems in the future. That's what I'm going to do. There's no reason not to do it. And as you're thinking about that, you just straighten up and it's easy. Feels good, no problem. Okay. By 8:30, this is 8 o'clock, right? By 8:30, you're done with it. You forgot all about it. It's gone until something happens. Like you see someone else that's slouching even worse than you were. Yeah. Or you almost fall off a chair because your posture is so bad, or something else happens to call your attention to your posture. And when it does, you say, oh yeah, well, I intend to improve it, and you straighten right up. No problem. You get a prompt, you straighten up. So this is the way it is for normal people. It's not because they have something wrong with them. The mind doesn't stay focused on a good intention. It just does. Good intentions, they start out at the top of your mind and then they sink to the bottom. And when they're out of your awareness, they don't work. If you don't think of your intention, it won't do anything. So I thought about this problem, and I worked with patients who, people who had been injured or had illnesses, and in order to recover, they had to do something. Like, for example, they had to do an arm strengthening exercise, many times a day, but not for very long, maybe spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes doing it, and it would hasten their recovery. And they intended to recover. They wanted to recover. They had no reluctance to do this. They didn't do it.
Yeah, forgot about it.
Yeah. So I thought, boy, if I could strap myself to the back of one of these patients and follow them around and remind them periodically, just whisper in their ear, Joe, do you remember? Just move your arm like that.
And that's what the MotivAider does. It sends
exactly what the MotivAider does.
Yeah.
It sends a prompt, and it capitalizes on the ability that the human mind does have to associate something that doesn't mean anything with a meaning. So for example, if you just feel like what the MotivAider does is it just sends a absolutely silent, private vibration signal to the person as often as they choose to get it. So let's say every 5 minutes, you would get a signal, just a vibration signal, which means exactly what you decide it's going to mean. Yeah. So if I decide it's going to mean to me, because I'm going to improve my posture, because I want to look more involved and engaged and interested, I'm going to say it's going to mean I'm no slouch. So when I feel this vibration, which no one else knows I'm getting, it's like a little box that's maybe about that big that fits in your pocket or on your waistband. When I feel that vibration, I automatically think I'm no slouch. And when I think I'm no slouch, I automatically straighten up, and I am no slouch. Yeah. And then pretty soon that becomes a mental habit. And I think about it even when I'm not feeling the vibration.
Yeah. And does it vibrate at random? Does it vibrate at random or?
It can. You can set it to vibrate at random or at regular intervals or average intervals. There's several options, but the idea is that you can get the prompts that your mind itself can't produce on its own. Yeah. And we can do so much with prompts. The problem is we can't produce the prompts on our own. So I say, I mean, it's sort of a slogan for the MotivAider that it makes your mind work better. Yeah. It makes use of what the mind does well, which is respond favorably to prompts. Yeah. But it also addresses the problem that the mind does not produce its own prompts very well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting little device. I imagine you could also set a timer on your phone or something to have kind of
Yes.
a similar effect.
Anything,
Yeah.
anything that you can do. The advantage of the MotivAider per se, and we've been like fanatical about this for it's been in use for 35 years all over the world, in 50 plus countries.
Yeah.
The thing about the MotivAider is that we've fine-tuned the vibration that it produces so that the vibration is very easy to pair or associate with a personal message, so that people report when they use the MotivAider that the vibration feels like it's coming from inside them. It doesn't feel like something on the outside. It feels like it's them. They just feel their thought. They feel the thought.
And could you program different prompts to go throughout the day so that you get different types of vibrations? Only one.
Well, you could, but just one. And that's because it will work much better if the device and its vibration come to mean a particular thing.
Yeah.
So you can use the device for many purposes, but only one purpose at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. And once that has become a habit, forever how long it takes, then you move to the next behavioral change. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so it's very simple. In fact, it's so simple that it's embarrassingly simple. It took me probably 2 or 3 years after I invented it to actually go forward and turn it into a product.
Yeah.
Because I thought it would be dismissed as being trivial because it's so simple.
Yeah, well,
but it's not. It's actually
the good ideas are actually essentially simple.
Exactly. That's why I finally convinced myself of that and went forward with it. And it's been used for like an amazing array of purposes. I mean, most of which I never even imagined.
Yeah. I'll be posting the link also to the MotivAider where people can find it if they're interested. Last question.
And they can use, by the way,
yeah.
People can use, there's lots of stuff on the MotivAider website that is useful whether people have motivators or not.
Yes.
I mean, if they use a phone or use anything, about how to prompt and about the value and importance of prompting.
Yeah. No, I've been going through the material. It's very useful. Yeah. The last question, Steve. What question, and I like to close with this question at all my interviews, what question about following through didn't I ask, which I should have asked? What angle did I overlook? I'm sure there are many, but what is one that comes to mind? Okay.
Well, one of them that I didn't ask myself for years until more recently is there an alternative to following through better? And there is. The alternative is to just accept the poor wiring and accept that you're not going to follow through and stop worrying so much about it. Yeah. People beat themselves up a lot because of their follow-through failures.
Yes.
And
that's true.
There is an option. I wouldn't favor it personally. I think it's better because I think I know how to follow through better, and I know how other people can learn how to follow through better. But if they're not going to do that, if they're not going to learn and adopt and use follow-through strategies of the sort that I mentioned, if they're not going to do that, then at the very least they can stop holding themselves accountable for poor follow-through, because it's a species problem. It's not an individual problem.
I'd like to, I appreciate you for saying this. I'd also like to link it to what you said earlier, which is that we can commit to not commit anymore, or we can decide to not commit anymore. And I think that's also an important part in this day and age where we have so many obligations and so many commitments, and we can have this old baggage kind of carrying forward, as you said, this load behind us, and to intentionally decide not to do something anymore or to let go of a past attention. I think it can really clean the slate, and
absolutely,
it can help us be more light. So we have to be conscious about what we intend to do, but we can also be intentional about not doing things.
Julius, you put that beautifully.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And people, and I believe, now this is what, a hypothesis or a theory on my part. I don't have proof, but I believe in my soul, based on my experience, that people's sense of well-being is determined in part by how many of their promises, what percentage of their promises they keep versus the percentage that they don't keep. And the best thing to do is to keep a higher percentage of your promises, but you can do that by making fewer promises as well as by keeping the ones that you make.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm one of those people. I judge myself harshly for not following through or not being my word or not having completed something. And also when, I mean, I have friends saying like, yeah, but can't you just skip this one training or whatever? Because no, for me, it's important to do whatever I said I committed to follow through with it. But obviously, even also me, I have plenty of intentions that I didn't follow through on, and I make myself wrong for it. But
Right.
It's in part why I study this topic, obviously. Yeah.
Poor follow through is not, I guess this is the major point I would make. Poor follow through is not your fault.
Yeah.
It's just, it's not your fault. It's a function of the poor wiring that we have. You can work around it. There are strategies for working around it, or at the very least, you can absolve yourself of any guilt for not following through. Yeah. And just stop making so many promises.
That's a very important one also, definitely. Steve, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Julius.
And your knowledge share. It was a pleasure.
You're a magnificent interviewer.
Well, thank you. I do my best.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
I'll send you all the details later, then you can find what I made out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Have a great day, Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.